Hello friends and welcome, I'm VA Adam. In today's video I'll be showing you how to replace the valve cover gasket on my 1972 Buick Riviera. The valve cover gasket is quite a common area for leaks, and that is usually due to uneven pressure around the seal. This is usually caused by over-tightening of bolts, and it can also be caused by clamps not spreading the pressure evenly around the entire valve cover. So in order to address this problem, I managed to get hold of these aftermarket valve cover clamps that have been created by a company called Almac. These covers spread the pressure of the bolts more evenly around the valve cover. They come with longer bolts to compensate for the bolts having to go through the clamp itself. I've ordered a set in chrome, but they're also available in gloss black or just primed. If we take a look at the instructions here, you can see I recommend using rubber gaskets, and also sealant or glue shouldn't actually be required. I've unfortunately already got cork gaskets, but I had a little chat with them and they said that the cork gaskets should be fine, just put a little bit of glue on the valve cover side and everything should be fine. So let's make a start on the job here. I'm going to be removing the valve covers on the driver's side to start with, as it's a bit easier to access, and I want to start on the easy side first to get that out of the way and to give me a bit of an idea as to how to get the job done. So to begin with, I just need to remove the air cleaner by unscrewing the wing nut and then remove all of the hoses and clamps that are attached to the air cleaner so that we can get it out of the way and get really good access to this area. If you're not familiar with where everything connects up, it's a really good idea to take pictures or a video before you start so you've got a reference point to be able to connect all of the hoses back up correctly at the end. So now the air cleaner's out of the way and we have much easier access to the bolts that are holding the valve cover on. I'm going to be removing these bolts lightly by loosening the bolts at opposite corners and then removing them completely. I don't want to risk twisting or distorting the cover in any way, even during the removal process. So now we can see the valve covers are removed. We can see there's a lot of gunk and build up around the edge here, and it's essential that all of that is removed as much as possible. If there's any kind of gunk or big bits left on the cover around here, when the new seal goes on, it won't sit down properly and make a proper seal, and we'll just have leaks again. But it is also essential to make sure that none of the debris or rubbish that you're removing from here at the time falls into the chambers. So you need to keep those protected, and the best way to do that is to just stuff some clean cloths or microfibers in the gaps here so that things can't fall down. I'm also going to be using a vacuum cleaner whilst using a tool to suck all of the debris up so that it's actually taken away straight away. As you can see here, I've removed the old gasket from the valve cover, and whilst the covers are off, I'm going to strip and repaint them because they're looking a little bit tired. In order to do this, I'll be using a wire brush on a drill and using my normal process of repainting them. If you want more details of my normal process for doing these types of jobs, be sure to check out my air cleaner refurb video here, which will give you details. But the basic process is to strip the item with a wire brush, clean with panel prep, clean with the tack cloth, etch prime, high build prime, sand, clean, paint. We now have the valve cover back to bare metal. I've also taken time to really clean the recess here where the new gasket will seat, just to make sure that it forms a really nice seal, and this will just help it get as good a seal as possible. The valve cover has now been repainted and looks so much better. This is a really nice red. This was the only shade of red that I could really get hold of. I think it's a bit more pink than the original colour, but it still looks really good. It does have quite a matte finish, so I think at some time I'm going to apply a lacquer to give it a little bit of a more shiny finish at a later stage. So now we move across to the more tricky side of the engine, and this valve cover is a little bit harder to access due to all of the items that are in the way. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to remove the wiring loom here out of the way. We're going to have to remove all of these hoses. We're also going to have to unbolt this large bracket that's here just to get it out of the way. So we've now got the bracket off, and this has given us much easier access to the area. You can see here that the wiring loom is out, and at some point somebody's run some electrical insulation tape around here, probably because there's been some kind of modification to the wiring under here or a bit of a repair. You can see that the original protection on the side here is crumbling away. So what I'm going to do is just strip all of this off all the way back and replace the whole run with new self-amalgamating rubber tape, which will really protect it well and just look so much better. So let's start off by loosening the bolts here, and on this side they're really tight, which is probably why it's leaking on this side. The bottom bolts are a little bit more difficult to get off because they have these pins which hold the HT lead holders on. So for this you just need a deep socket or a ring spanner which will help you get those off. So now that the valve cover's off, let's have a little look at the profile here, and we can see some real distortion that's going on here. And this is probably due to the bolts being too tight and what's causing the leaking. This does need to be rectified once the valve cover's been tidied up. I now have all of the items stripped back, and again, it's a good opportunity to strip anything that you're taking off back and refurbish it if it doesn't look up to scratch or it's looking a little bit tired. We can see this distortion a little bit better now, and I'm definitely going to have to reform these parts or try and straighten them out, maybe by using a hammer or just sort of bending these back in place as best I can. And I'll also need to make sure that the area on the engine block is cleaned up where the cover's going to sit back down, the same as we did on the other side, by just cleaning it up using a vacuum cleaner, making sure that nothing falls down into the chambers. This part here is the holder that the wiring loom was seated in. I'm just going to paint this red to match the valve covers. And the last item that you've got here is the bracket that we saw earlier, which I'm just simply going to paint satin black so that it matches the air cleaner, because that was the original colour. So here is the new gasket, and you'll notice that I've painted some protruding parts here red. These protruding parts sit into some recesses on the valve cover head and just help hold the gasket in place. But I noticed when I put the driver's side one back in that you could see these, and they looked a little bit odd being sort of cork against the red. So I've just painted them red on this side just to make the whole assembly look a little bit nicer and tie it all together. I'm going to apply the new gasket here with some gasket glue. And I'll be doing that, as I said earlier, because this is a cork gasket, not a rubber gasket. If you have a rubber gasket and you're using these clamps, you shouldn't need to apply some glue. So we're just going to apply some glue to the recess side here on the valve cover itself. And we need to run it around the bolts on the inside side of the bolts in a continuous bead, so that when the gasket sits in, it just sits in really nicely and keeps in place. So you can see the bead that I've applied here. Hopefully it's not too much. That was kind of just the rate it came out with the dispenser. I'm now going to drop the gasket in and get it bolted in. So now you can see here the gasket's actually in place. Now there's only about 5 minutes between fitting a gasket and getting it all bolted in. So I'm going to have to work really quickly, get it in place, get it clamped in, get it bolted in, but not rush the job, just work at a decent pace. So now you can see here the cover's all bolted in place. The bolts are tightened in 2 stages. So be sure to tighten the bolts opposite to each other. So for example, top right, bottom left, bottom right. Do it in that sort of sequence. And they're tightened in 2 stages. The first stage is to tighten them to about 30 inches per pound torque, and then the second stage is about 55 inches per pound torque. All of the instructions for this are on the Olmac valve cover clamps. So what this does is it spreads the pressure really evenly around the clamps as you're bolting them down, and just prevents any of that distortion that we saw earlier on the cover. I would also recommend wrapping some masking tape around the sockets whilst you tighten them, just to prevent any paint damage on the new fresh paint. Now you may remember earlier I mentioned that the original bolts down the bottom had some pins to hold the HT lead holders in place. Unfortunately, the new bolts don't have these, as they're just standard bolts. I decided to try and create these pins for myself, and I did manage to make it work, so I wanted to share my method with you. So what I did first of all was I got hold of some spare bolts to work on. The bolts are 1.25 inches long, 1/4 inch diameter, 20 thread per inch count. I then used a 2.5mm drill bit on a pillar drill and very carefully drilled a hole in the centre of the bolt through the head. I then used a tap and die set to create a 3mm hole thread. Into this thread I screwed a long M3 machine screw, and finally I used a Dremel wheel cutter to remove the head from the M3 screw and then just smarten up the ends. And so here is what the modified bolt looked like in the end. You can see how the HT lead holder will fit over this pin and hold it in place. And this is a really good recreation of the original bolt. As always, all of the relevant links are in the description below, so just check out there if you need any parts. So as always guys, thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and until next time, this is V8 Adam, signing off.